in the Chicago room. Our speakers from left to right are Melissa Pierce, who is, yep, I can redo that. Okay, should I start over? Okay, hello everyone, you are in the informed consent room, room session 2-3 in the Chicago room. Our speakers are Melissa Pierce, who is the director of CW Devs from on your left, David Ease, a news applications developer for the National Public Radio, and then Matt Gee, who is the co-founder at Data Science for the Social Good. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. So hopefully we're going to have a fun and lively panel about informed consent in the age of big data. So just to kind of get started, who has an Apple thing in their pocket in the room?
It's out of battery.
Okay. And who got U2'd the other week? So a couple people got U2'd.
Familiar with the term of what it means.
So does anybody know? I was just talking to a friend about this. Does anybody? Who can tell me what I'm talking about?
Didn't they just force the new album into your iTunes?
Yeah. So if you check your iTunes, maybe you haven't even checked. If you check your iTunes, you probably have an album called "Songs of Innocence" by U2 that Apple forcibly downloaded at an event to everybody's device last week.
Well, they called it gifting. So force and gifting, just semantics are important.
Like
semantics
what
are
your
important.
grandma does at Christmas with a new sweatshirt, right? Like it's the same thing.
Yeah, right. Which is probably what 18-year-olds felt about seeing U2
That's right.
on their phones. So I just, I thought that was kind of an interesting sort of example of exactly what we're going to talk about. So the format today is going to be Q&A. The assumption that I just want to start with is that we live in a world where Google and Facebook and everybody else is sort of following us and watching what we're doing, and we're participating in that. So there's no going back. But the question is, what the questions are going to be, what are the kinds of social contracts that we need? How can we talk about this stuff? What are things going to look like in 40 or 50 years? And how do we get to a world where we're happy in 40 or 50 years? So I'm just going to start throwing questions after our panel. If people have feedback or other comments to make, we want this to be a really lively group discussion. So raise your hand. I'll try to keep it moving so that we don't get stuck. So let's start with Melissa. What's informed consent? Let's try to frame the issue for us, and maybe give some examples of doing it right and maybe not doing it so right, doing it wrong.
Okay, so informed consent would be me asking you if I could wear these glasses and take your photograph or video you. I would ask, do you know I can video you and I can upload this to the internet or to anyone? I could send it to my grandma, is that okay? And then you would have the chance to ask yes or answer yes. Informed consent can look like the signs I didn't see all over everything that says this panel is live streamed. Informed consent could be that when I download Facebook's new Messenger app and it says all of these friends have also downloaded this app, why don't you suggest to these friends that they download it too? Well, that's uninformed consent. I don't think any of those people know that they have been singled out for me to pressure them to download Facebook's new messaging app. And then coming from feminist circles, of course, there's this huge conversation right now about only yes means yes, right? Consent is consent, Even if you're standing right next to each other and have been having sex for 10 years, you better make sure that someone wants to have sex with you right in that moment by saying, hey, do you want to have sex with me right now? And making sure you get an affirmative from that. So informed consent can even go to that, which I kind of like using that particular model of informed consent when talking about data, because a lot of people don't think about their data as themselves. And I think that when we start thinking about that, when we look 40 years out to when we're downloading our consciousness and our data is ourselves, that we need to be really clear and catch up ethically. So informed consent being just like that movement of yes equals yes equals yes in feminist theory. So.
Do you mind if I build on that a little
Yeah.
bit? That's fantastic. So coming from a research background, informed consent in kind of a research setting has its roots actually in the Nuremberg trials post World War II. There's something that was laid down called the Nuremberg Code after seeing some of the horrible atrocities that were committed by some Nazi doctors. There was a realization that there needed to be a code of ethics around human trials, around doing some sort of experiment with humans and having them participate. And it has really the Nuremberg Code had 10 points. Things like voluntary consent, that it needed to have a benefit, a public benefit, or a likely public benefit, and that you should start potentially, if you can run the experiment and learn something without using humans in the trial, then you should start with that and then only use humans as kind of last resort. You should avoid unnecessary suffering and injury. You have to absolutely not do anything that has a risk of death or disability, unless, and the interesting proviso in this particular provision of the Nuremberg Code was, unless the doctors are willing to do the same thing on themselves. And the benefits need to outweigh the risk. They need to, the people doing the trial need to reduce all the risks through preparation and setting the trial up so that you have done all your due diligence. And that it should be really only done by scientifically qualified people, and people that are able to, in that moment, make the right kinds of judgments about how the trial should be conducted, and that the patient can and has the ability at any point in time to opt out, to say no, I'm done. This is not something I want to do, and that the person that is doing the trial at any point is always vigilant and is always looking and saying, is there some new risk that I didn't anticipate early on that has come up, and if so, you need to stop the thing. And those are the 10 points that really that really started the idea of informed consent and have guided biomedical ethics and behavioral trials since then. And in the 70s, there was a really fantastic report that was put together after a 4-day conference, not too unlike this, called the Belmont Report, that really took some of those initial principles and codified them. And as we talk today, it would be fantastic, to think about as we're discussing the implications of informed consent in the era of big data, especially in Chicago and especially in this community. Thinking about in this conference, it's not unreasonable to think that we could come up with a Willis report, right? That helps us think more creatively about what we're doing here. So that's kind of the history of informed consent on the research side.
So I want to lead with a question about sort of the trade-offs here. So is there a trade-off between privacy and innovation? What are the trade-offs between privacy and innovation? I should say I worked for the Chicago Tribune, and I was really happy to do it. We did really great investigative work. We also track you through a variety of services when you come to our website. We are watching everything you do when you come to the Chicago Tribune website, and actually watching what you're doing on other websites too. And we're mining it to make money so that we can stay in business, so that we can do all this great investigative work that you guys love so much. So can you guys kind of address kind of this balance between privacy and innovation? How does that work out?
Oh, good God. Privacy and innovation. I was thinking about, there's this marketing guru, Seth Godin, who came up with this term, permission marketing. And it's kind of taken the marketing arm of the internet by storm, and it freaks me out. It's scary that I could go visit the Tribune's website and they'd be tracking everything I did. It's frightening because, I was telling these guys before the panel, there are a couple things that we have to remember. Sharing, if you share something with someone, you trust them. And if you share your privacy is sharing power specifically. So when I come to the Tribune's website, there is not a pop-up that says by participating in, just observing our website, we are tracking all of these things about you and will then serve you ads regarding that particular thing so that we can stay in business and show you more of these things. Well, that's great, but it's kind of like the street harassment of the internet. Yeah. Hey, baby, that's a really nice website you just came from. What'd you get there? Hey, that's a nice hair color you just bought. Are you gonna wear that later? I got a place you can go for that. Come on over. So that's kind of what it feels like. And it's considered permission marketing, but a lot of these things aren't coming up. And maybe that's because we have ad blockers on. Maybe we're not seeing their pop-up ads that say, by visiting us, this is the trust. By trusting us, this is how we're selling you down the river for pennies on the dollar. So that's kind of an interesting thing, I think. As far as innovation goes, these Google Glass, I've never set them up. I got them. I paid a lot of money for them. But in order for me to set them up, I have to give them parts of my information, which they probably already have, but like on principle. I'm not going to connect these to Wi-Fi. I'm not going to be able to use them to make any documentaries, which I would love to do, first-person POV, because I'm not comfortable with the trade-offs in privacy. Although just by putting them on, you all have to trust that I believe that I haven't set them up. That I'm not taking your picture just by winking at you. So the trade-off is that I don't get to innovate with these glasses because I think that my privacy is worth it. And that's just a personal thing. I would love to hear it from another perspective.
I totally agree with you. There's absolutely a trade-off between consent and innovation, and privacy and innovation. I mean, the modern web is built on non-consensual experiments. And what they've gone from is innocuous to in some cases intrusive. And the first experiments that were run on you when Facebook first started were just testing the button size and the colors of fonts and things that none of us would have wanted to be bothered with, to give our consent, most likely. So the first experiment that most of us probably heard of, and some of us were probably rightly outraged about, was not the first experiment that Facebook run. It was just the first experiment that was manipulating something that was a little too personal, a little too close to home. And that's one of the big challenges, is that the line has actually been blurry from the A/B test type of innovation and creating a web experience that is more responsive and is customized to us and gives us all the things we want in the instant we want them, but does it in a way that isn't asking questions that require experiments that are intrusive to us. And
so, just real quick, are people familiar with the experiment that Matt's talking about? So Facebook basically put negative or positive messages into your feed and then saw how users reacted. Maybe not your feed. They took a sample of users.
Yeah.
So sort of question is, one thing I found out is most of my friends actually, until I wrote like a feed bomb post on Facebook, did not realize Facebook filtered their feeds. And how do you, as a technologist or whoever you are, like explain to somebody that they should care and why they should, and how do you teach people about all the things that are going on the internet that I noticed that Facebook filters my feed, but turns out most people don't.
The best way that I've found to explain this is to try to get people to see data as their own body, as their own thoughts. I mean, basically, Facebook is gaslighting you. I mean, every single internet website is face-to-face meetings, people are gaslighting you. They're like, this is who I present myself to be. And maybe that's not true, but at least you have so much more data to bring in. You have this visual data, you have body language, you have all of those things. You don't really have that on the internet. But it's really getting people to see that what they're putting out there and what they're seeing is not real, but it is manipulating them in some way, because people get really upset with manipulation. I just heard something on NPR about like 80% of women who go into shelters to escape their abusers are being tracked online by their abusers. You know, so you think about that. It's a really good way to get people to think about how corporations might be abusing them, or, you know, the Internet of Things might be abusing them. You know, if I share a photo on this, I'm trusting that photo gets shared with whomever I want. But most people don't even understand how a network works, how information gets from their computer onto the internet. They don't understand that. So really teaching them how their data is an extension of their body and how that travels and who it goes to. You know, this is why I'm so adamant about making it more about body, more about informed consent, like sex, much more about that. You know, much more about conversation.
And building on that, this actually really illustrates one of the fundamental tensions with informed consent in the era of big data, and that is what informed consent has historically meant in medical trials is that a person knows all of the relevant facts at the moment of deciding whether or not they want to opt into that trial, or whether they want to have that experiment run on them, or whether they're willing to say yes to the situation. And that's unfortunately something that has already become unwieldy in most medical trials. If you look at informed consent forms, they're usually 30 pages long, and you know it's difficult to think. I haven't read something that's 30 pages long that I can honestly say I now retain all of the relevant facts in those 30 pages, and I certainly didn't read the probably over 30 pages in the form when I first signed up for Facebook, that somewhere in there said something about the relevant facts that were going to be included. And this is really the main challenge, because in the last 2 years, by one account, all of the data, so if you look at all of the data that has ever been created in the history of humanity, 90% of it, by one estimate, was created in the last 2 years.
Just read that.
That is, it's an astounding fact, and who knows if it's actually true, but it does illustrate something really important. And that is, our ability to collect data about ourselves has grown exponentially, and it's far outstripped our ability to keep up with understanding what that data means. And we no longer have the luxury of knowing all the things that are known about us as individuals. And that's really one of the biggest challenges of informed consent in the era of big data, is that we might not actually be able to do it the way we've done it historically. We might not be able to be fully informed at any point in decision making. But that doesn't mean that it's not critical, and it's not important for us to figure out how can we be sufficiently informed at the point of decision making.
Here's people.
I'm afraid the Nazi doctors have won out.
Yes.
Because clearly we're being raped and disarticulated every moment by data, little devices, of course, are gathering data about me and about you. I took a couple of unpermitted pictures of you, and also violating you in other ways with other devices that I have. I wouldn't even tell you what they are. But anyway, I say the hell with privacy. Privacy is, not only is it useless, it gets in the way of progress in some very critical ways. And the promise of big data really is dependent on abandoning privacy. A very good example of that, of course, would be medical data, the data that will be fed into the healthcare system by wearable devices. The Apple Watch is a very good example of that. All this physiological data, that will be accumulated and be fed into the medical system with all these wearables, whatever they may be, is going to lead to tremendous strides in medicine. Because obviously,
For a certain part of the
mankind has never
population.
had this kind of data before. So I say, the hell with privacy. Number one. Number two, to insist on informed consent is to, in effect, sideline you from the glories of participating in the internet and the global system that it entails. I mean, if you don't, well, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. Well, in that case, you're not anywhere, in effect. So I throw my hands up personally. I think most people do. When you look at those, page after page of all permission, and I say the hell with it, and I say the hell with privacy. It just stays. It's just getting in the way.
Right. Oh, yeah. Well, I don't put my hands up on roller coasters, although, they tell you not to, because I don't want my hand and head chopped off. There are things that remain private. You're like, throw your hands up and forget about it. I was like, throw my hands up and get part of my private self taken away. So I think a lot of people would not agree with that, but I did watch this incredible documentary about this gentleman named Josh who made all this money in the .com boom, and then ran this experiment. It's a film called We Live in Public. If you haven't seen this, it's incredible. And basically, he just filmed everything everyone did all of the time. And I'm not really against the medical things. In fact, I'm currently building a corset that tracks everything that I do. And I've bought this website called The Quantified MILF. I think that's hilarious, right? But I get to come up with that, right? And I don't have to use anyone else's particular tracking device. I get to do it on my own. And I'm happy to share that data. But also we have to think about all of these medical devices and all this wearable tech. Who's wearing it, and what are we learning about them, and how much of the population of big data, which is really just a lot of people in very small geographies, using it. So what are we learning about white Westerners? That's basically what we're learning. What are we learning about white Westerners? Mostly, who's not wearing it. You look at where globally all of the people are connected to the internet right now. You look at where people are using mobile devices, if they're using mobile devices, and what parts of the nation are lit up with all of these things. So you have to figure out what that data is, if it's useful to the global population, and who's not taking part in the ethical conversations about what to do with it. Right now, we don't have that many ethical oversight committees over the internet because it's still, the Wild West. It's very punk. It's whatever. But we have so many different ideas of what privacy is. I'm sure a lot of the people in this room would have very different levels of what they're comfortable sharing with the world. And maybe it would be great if we all shared that. But, I'm really thankful that HIPAA makes it incredibly difficult for me to get information about what Grace Hopper died of besides old age. I mean, I can't just go look that up. I'm a little conflicted about the right to be forgotten, but I think that's a really important conversation for us to have. I'm not really ready to throw my entire self into this, into this stream, this huge human consciousness. Only parts of that I'm ready for.
So Melissa brought up a really good point. I just want to really quickly reinforce because it's so important. I mentioned earlier the Belmont report, and one of the three principles. So there are three principles in the Belmont report. One is respect for persons. Second is beneficence. The third is justice. And these are the three ethical principles that should be guiding, or have really guided for the last 25 years. Decisions about whether or not experiments should be run, whether on the internet or in a hospital. And that you brought up the issue of justice, this very important one, especially for a crowd like this. It's thinking about data in the context of a city, a county, in the context of a state, and a critical issue in that, embedded in that issue of justice is really, are you ensuring in the way the data is collected and the way the data is analyzed that you are being representative of the both respectful for and representative of all of the populations that that could benefit potentially from the insights from a particular experiment. And that's a really, really important point, and it's that the internet isn't necessarily as just as it could be.
Right.
Yeah.
So I saw a hand here.
I agree. I'm not ready to straight away give away my privacy entirely, but I think it's really time to move to a more nuanced view of how we think about it. I think the reality is that it's not about preventing access to data anymore, but it really is about regulating and governing how it's used.
Exactly.
And so I think this conversation is pointing to some interesting ways of thinking about how we define an acceptable use case, but also I think something really important about the dynamic right now is how much more willing we are to trade away or give away our data to consumer organizations or to companies.
Yes.
Because we see the benefits right away. So we're an online data or we're shopping with Amazon or whatever we're doing. We don't really care because we see the benefits right away. And I think that's not so defining of the government case. You brought up how difficult it is to go through reams of paperwork to kind of get, I think we're automatically distrustful of how government's going to use our data. And here in a conference about civic data use, I think we need to be thinking about how can governments and nonprofit help model much more simplified, beneficial informed consent agreements that would help us ensure that we're supporting the open government and civic tech movement and helping to maybe model things that hopefully corporations will take into account as well. So I wonder what your
That's
thoughts
great.
are on that.
That's
What
great.
should we do to move that forward?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I have to think about it.
Oh, so yes, I think that's. I think you said. I guess can you say amen in a crowd like this? Yeah. No.
No,
I. But.
Really like how do we think about that? Who's doing it well, and how do we think
So
about
I think one of the ways it's one of the most interesting discussions going on in consent is actually going on in the medical community as a result of ACA. Because one of the things, so the American Affordable Care Act, right, had embedded in it the creation of a new organization that brings together the medical records of 100 million patients, and because of this for the first time, combination of these medical records of people who haven't consented to have their medical records in this pool, but nevertheless they are, their doctors are now going to be able to, for the first time, answer fundamental questions about the effectiveness of certain treatments, of certain drugs, of behavioral interventions, that will make all of us healthier. It'll make all of us have to spend less for more effective medication and more effective healthcare, and that's amazing. But there's a lot of discussion going on right now about how you can do that in a way that's ethical, but also doesn't require you to send out a 30-page document to all 100 million people, because that would just stifle innovation entirely. The exact same conversation is happening, I think, but should be accelerated and can happen in thinking about the same types of social interventions that we care deeply about in this room, that make our communities healthier, that let us know what educational program is going to be most useful for kids. There's the opportunity to create the exact same kind of 100 million medical record databases in each of the areas that you care about, and there's the obligation as we do that to figure out a way to do it in a lightweight way, but also that is ethical and ensures society is not selling its soul in order to make itself better.
But I add another component to this conversation about consent, and that's the government with massive wireless, suspicionless wiretapping, intrusion. So you, even after the end of the day, you invest some kind of agreement with Google or AT&T or other providers of service, and they swear that they're not going to spy on us or they will conduct themselves honorably with us. The government can still go in the back door, it seems, and still trump the personal relationship, whatever contractual relationship we think we have with our providers. So maybe what we need is another session on personal security that basically says we don't really trust anybody with our data. So I want to put up my own personal encryption, and that's how I'm going to choose to interact with you beyond my world.
There's a very interesting, I'll just briefly comment on this, is a very interesting project that was started in 2012 and I think went a little defunct, but it got at this, and there are a number of new projects to come in. There's something called the Locker Project, and the idea was, instead of all of these sites owning your data, you would actually own it all in a secure locker, and that you would give permission to each site. Each site would have to ask for permission to use your data, and that you would actually be able to consent to it. And so it would essentially flip the way the data is collected about you, where people who wanted to collect data would have to actively ask you. That particular project, it turned out, in order to build it, you had to build something called, you had to build API connections to all the APIs for all the services, and that turns out if you build that, you could have a very, very profitable business. And so the folks who built the Locker project ended up going a different direction, and now own a company called Singly, which is the API connector. And so if anyone's able to prevent, to hold off long enough from getting the big checks from investors to finish developing the Locker project, then that would be a great thing to do.
Right. Oh, no, I don't have anything to good God.
I did want to just point out something that I was reading recently about open data along the lines of the earlier question. I just moved to Washington, D.C., so it turns out that to use the open data in Washington, D.C., you will not, this is the terms of service that you implicitly sign by using the data, you will not use the site to encourage others to engage in any conduct that would constitute a criminal offense or give rise to civil liability. So you will not use our open data for something that could get us in trouble. And that is the terms of service on Washington, D.C.'s open data. That's crazy. That's really amazing to me. And as a journalist, that's really disturbing, because a lot of times in journalism, one of the things that can happen is that you can be pursuing something and the powerful can stymie you in the courts, oftentimes for many, many years. So I think that's really interesting. So I want to go back to this kind of like public, private, we live online kind of idea. So there's been this whole debate about who owns your tweets. So people's tweets get quoted without their consent, say in a news article. How should that how should we think about that? How should that work? Let's...
Right. Who owns them? Once again, sharing is trust, privacy is power. You're trusting Twitter I think Twitter owns your tweets. No. You own your tweets.
Copyright on your tweets.
I still can't download mine no matter how much they say I can.
They have an archive tool now. That's
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah, I haven't.
You own copyright on all of your tweets.
So then I own my tweets.
Right.
But
the trick that David's
this is-
talking about, right, is if you embed a tweet in
Mhm.
a news article, are you quoting it? Right? Because certainly if we were to say something in this room and then it's quoted, that's to be expected, right?
Right.
But fully embedding a tweet, is that a quote? Is that actually taking a thing that you own and putting it somewhere else? It's a very complicated question.
Right.
But Twitter, you actually own the copyright to every tweet you make. They do not.
Which is incredible, because that's so much more copyright law, which is in shambles now too. Okay, God, our technology is so far ahead of our ability to legislate and think ethically about it at all.
So how
I'd
do
love
we...
to build on that question, and maybe flip it around so that we can all ask ourselves a very important question. And that is, so I actually have friends that A/B test their tweets. So you can do this. You can, everyone, I guess, most people on Twitter are doing it so they can get retweeted or get attention of some sort. And you can certainly experiment with what things about your tweets seem to work the best, and getting people to retweet it or just click on it. And I have several friends who actually do this a lot. And this is actually, I think, an important example of something that's happening increasingly, and that probably a lot of you folks in the room have to grapple with. And that is, I mentioned earlier that one of the critical components of the Nuremberg Code is that only scientifically qualified persons would conduct trials. And one of the great things that's happened, one of the great and terrible things that's happened with the internet is that in some ways we've all become principal investigators. right? We can all run experiments very easily, very cheaply, which means I think for the first time, all of us have the obligation to, even if you don't consider yourself a scientist, if you have a website and you are actively making changes, or you sign up for one of those services that allows you to do A/B testing on things, you should probably start to ask yourself questions about whether or not the types of experiments that you're running are ethical, right? And carry with you the burden of understanding that you are in some ways responsible for making ethical decisions about your experimentation as well. Maybe that's not something that applies to everyone, but I think it is one of the big challenges that certainly came up with the Facebook experiment, and I think will increasingly be the case, is that folks that haven't thought about the ethics of experimentation are now running experiments all the time, and that means we need to expand the conversation to include those folks, so that they can think about and articulate what they're doing.
And I was also thinking that the context of it matters. Whereas everyone was up in arms about Facebook, doing this thing, no one really gave a crap when OkCupid did it, because OkCupid is like an online dating site, and they just mess with everyone's algorithms and match people's up for whatever reason. Everyone just assumes that dating is an experiment, but they don't assume that communicating with their friends and family on Facebook is an experiment. So context matters. And this is something I think people who work with data and look at all of these things need to pay really close attention to, is the context of what they're pulling the data for, what they're using it for, and why it matters. Because one set of ethical standards is not going to fly in a different space.
Yeah.
I guess wouldn't giving consent be overwhelming because of the amount of information that we do give out every day freely? And wouldn't it just be better too, like you were saying, focusing on security, like how much of my information is secure? Like I know you can buy someone's information off the cloud, and that's scary to me, where someone can get my name, number for a small price. So isn't it just focusing on just going to security? And I think the UK, they're looking at legislators where they're going to start protecting their people from the UK, where we don't have it. I think we only have the HIPAA laws and the healthcare things that protect us.
There are a lot of groups, like not-for-profits and just groups that are trying to figure this out. The Electronic Frontier Foundation does this often, trying to get people to think about privacy, like on a personal level. You can go download the Tor browser and try to stay away from all of this stuff and not be tracked. I mean, there was a woman who hid her pregnancy from the internet.
Yeah.
She hid her pregnancy because she did not want to be marketed to. She didn't buy things on Amazon. She didn't look at anything that might indicate that she was pregnant. I remember
but then her husband got arrested for buying a whole bunch of prepaid gift cards.
Right. So just because she didn't want to be marketed to. Yeah. My husband bought someone a gift at Target, a baby gift at Target, and I, for the next year, got stuff, welcoming me to motherhood. Right? I got it. They knew that much about me. It scared the crap out of me. I was like, don't ever buy anything with your credit card or online again, because this is too much information. And that's just them knowing that I'm married, and maybe they figured out that I was fertile. I don't know. But, that's scary. It's frightening for me to know that the internet might know when I'm ovulating. Okay?
Yeah.
Right, so Tor and all of that stuff.
And I think what I don't have to.
Okay, yeah, so there's a question over here.
I actually have a question about anonymizing data. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, anyone from the audience, about that as a potential tool, as we're talking about the spectrum of data, right? So in two aspects, one actually cleaning the data and scrubbing it from
Laundry.
Information, or in this more figuratively in this wide 100 million data points, you as one data point, maybe it matters a little bit less because you're this big pool, and that help has that could potentially have that function. So
Sure.
just hear about what
I can briefly comment on that.
Right,
So
yeah, that's what Tor does.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Tor anonymizes everything.
One of the so we haven't talked
Yeah.
about this, but for
far do
researchers
you
within
scrub it?
universities, they often have to get they have to get approval from something called an institutional review board, or IRB, that kind of reviews the ethics of working with data and doing a particular experiment. And one of the exclusions, or one of the areas where they can not necessarily have to go through, in some senses, not necessarily have to go through an IRB or avoid certain regulations around the research, is if they're working with anonymized data, because there's an implicit recognition that if you can't really identify the person, there's a much lower chance that it poses any particular risk to any individual within that group. But one of the challenges in anonymizing data now, and this is something, if you talk to any of the folks who are working with the large open data portals, like the data.gov folks, one of their biggest, the thing that keeps them up at night is something called the mosaic effect. And that is, you might have, every data set on the data.gov portal might be anonymized. But there might be the ability to reconstruct a picture of an actual individual, to be able to pinpoint on a person, once you combine all of the different pieces of information trapped away in the thousands of data sets, the thousands of anonymized data sets on the portal. And that's something that we don't understand very well. That's one of the other challenges to big data. Yes, we are all more anonymous, but as data goes longer, as more people are in the pool, but at the same time, we're all less anonymous as data grows wider, and as we know things about our shopping behavior and things about where we drove, and those two things, since both are constantly growing, but the population of the world is capped, and the set of things that are knowable about an individual doesn't seem to be as bounded. It seems to me that re-identifiability, even in anonymous data sets, is going to be a constant challenge.
Yeah, as much as some of this data is anonymized, you're still you still can be picked out. You're still a special snowflake. I'll just give a quick example. With the crime data, there's no names associated with it, but you have a date, you have a time, you have where the incident happened to the block level, and it turns out that there's this inmate lookup tool where you can get people's names and you know what they're booked for and you know when they're booked. And so it's pretty easy to cross-correlate some of these data sets and get back to a real human being, even if one silo is anonymized.
Right. It's like getting dropped off 3 blocks from your house from a taxi because you don't really trust the driver, but all of the drivers talk and you trust some more than others.
Right.
So that matters too. Pretty soon everyone knows where you live. I tweet about crime in my neighborhood all the time, and I realized just looking through my tweets that someone could triangulate exactly where I live. I was like, well, shoot, there is a shooting, every week, a couple blocks from my house. That's not okay. But 2, now someone could absolutely stalk me. Not that they couldn't anyway, because all of that is out there.
So that's something I was going to ask. So how many of these issues are new? I mean, some of these things seem like they're things that could have happened in the past. Like, what makes it new, or why does it feel different? I'll get you and then you. If anybody.
Right.
Sounded like Hunter had a.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't, for most people, like, a reaction I've seen is like, yes, it's now totally possible to stalk me on the internet because, like, I posted a photo and it's got but nobody's gonna go through the, like, amount of difficulty it requires to triangulate your house, basically.
I don't know. That happens to me at least once a month.
Yeah, it doesn't happen to me for somewhat obvious reasons. But, so, for a lot of people, the answer they give is, oh, it doesn't matter for me right now.
Right.
Of like, oh yeah, but nobody, I'm small fish.
Yeah.
How do you get somebody to care?
Well, that's just this is why I continuously go back to women on the internet, because I think that we don't think of ourselves as this minority, as like humans. People on the internet, we don't think of ourselves as this marginalized whatever. But then we have these giant corporations taking all of our data. So it is, we need to start kind of thinking a little bit in that way. When women were first on the internet, a lot of them went by pseudonyms. And it was a lot less invasive at that time. They went by pseudonyms so that nobody knew that they were women on the internet. They just assumed they were, someone else. It's only guys here or whatever. And now you're at the point where women are just going by their actual names because they have pretty much given up trying to be safe, and are working on different ways ethically. So I think in a lot of ways, if you can look at some of those marginalized relationships with the internet, you can see kind of where other trends are going as far as ethics, and as far as what people are doing to combat it and how they're looking for people to care. I mean, a lot of people have grown up with it, so they just don't. And, we're going to have to deal with putting our hands up in the air and giving up on privacy. But that doesn't mean that we can't regulate or start thinking about it ethically, because 40, 50, 60 years down the line, there will be this backlash of people saying, you know what, this is not okay. It's not okay that you know so much about me. It's not okay that now I've uploaded my consciousness and you're fucking with that. That suddenly it's not okay that all of me is out there and you're using that for A/B testing of your new, foot fungus product, or, you've taken the MRI of my knee that I got yesterday. I got a DVD of it. I feel like I own my data, but I don't. I just happen to have a copy of it and own the original knee. But, you're using that to make robots that kill people now. So am I okay with that?
Did you still have a question?
The short answer of how are we going to get people to care is we're not.
Yeah.
Right? Most people don't care because most people don't understand how the network works or the repercussions of it, right? 2 years ago, Matt Honan, who was a reporter for Wired, but it purely randomly that he was a reporter for Wired, had his phone hacked and his identity stolen through an incredibly simple exploit on iOS.
I remember that.
Yeah.
He wrote an entire article about it, right? It became a thing in tech sites and stuff like that. That exact same exploit is what was used to leak all of the celebrity nudes that just happened, right? Apple never patched it, right? They didn't think it was actually an exploit, right? It literally was just a person found out enough of his information to be able to answer the security questions about it, right? So you had that, you had Edward Snowden, then you have celebrity nudes, right? The celebrity nudes, suddenly Apple now has authentication turned on for iCloud, the thing that covered that up, right? Both Apple and Google have now said that their next iteration of their operating system, OS 8, that just came out, and Android L, will have encryption turned on by default of the entire phone, right? Both of those things are reactions to celebrity nudes far more than they are for that. You need to get it to a point where suddenly everyone's like, oh shit, like this happened to Jennifer Lawrence, right? That's far more important than it happened in Matt Honan, and far more important than the abstraction of Edward Snowden, right? I mean, people care when they suddenly see it at a mainstream level, and that's very hard to do. So it sounds like you reverse your position that we can get people to care as long as we can get celebrities to care.
We
need some celebrity data privacy.
The majority of America to stop smoking. Right?
Yeah,
It
we
took
need
how
PR
long?
companies. Is that what we need?
What?
I said we need PR companies and marketing companies to.
Well, we need to be able to prove that it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
First, right, and then take the slow work of getting there.
That would be interesting as far as PR and personal brand goes. I would be interested to take that on, actually.
So we've been talking a lot
Business
about
idea.
we've been talking a lot about risk, and as is the case with any interesting subject, it's a mix of risk and opportunity. And I'm wondering if we can we can possibly spend a little bit of time talking about the opportunity side of big data and consent, and what solutions there are out there, and how we not only as participants, but also we as potential, if you're an organization that's collecting data on your, on the people that you're serving, you're running into issues of consent every day. And it gives you the opportunity to learn important things about how you're working and how you can do things more effectively. Taryn actually gave a really great primer on this in the session before this. That opportunity is very, very real. So it would be great if we can have some discussion about that before the hour is over.
There's a couple more hands, so let's get to them and then cycle back to that. Is that cool? Is that Tom?
So here's a question for the group. As an organizer, do you believe that collective action will lead to a desirable change for social benefit? So we're hearing a lot of bad policy, a lot of bad practice being worked on us either by commercial forms or government. So do people in this room believe in the power of collective action and organizing in politics? Do you think that there should be some kind of a pact or united users of Facebook that puts money behind a political candidates who pledge to undo these things? Because, at the end of the day, it is people in Washington or Springfield who are either permitting these bad practices to happen or participating. So I guess a lot of people, I think, that I've talked to in this generation don't even believe in government. They don't even believe in political civic engagement. So I'm wondering, is there a political organizing avenue to deal with some of the issues that you raised here?
Let's see. Once again, the Electronic Frontier Foundation is working. I would give them my money most of the time. Organizing, yes. I think politics is hard because there's so much money at stake there, and I don't think a lot happens there until you really push, until a celebrity nude comes out. So if we could just, celebrity nude it all the time, happy to do that. Politics is tough, but what was that super PAC? Come on, we just raised all this money for this gazillion dollars.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
It wasn't. No, it was in actual. We raised millions of dollars for this as just a community online. And this is why I'm not a reporter, because I can't remember facts. Yeah, the Mayday Pact. And hopefully, that's helping with some things. But I think that there are tons of tiny organizations doing that. And hopefully they're coming together and, we get the people get their own lobbyists. And I think that we have tons of tools to do that, but it's just, whether we trust those tools to do that.
And
I think this is so tricky because although I believe in collective action and that it can make a big difference, there's also aspects of open government and open data that I use every day in my job, and it makes our lives a lot easier, and it makes it easier to get to impact with what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really on the fence throughout this whole conversation, and I don't know. I mean, I think the issue in collective impact is what are we fighting for? What are we asking for? Because there are some really good things that are out there now. And so, yeah, and I don't know the answer to that. Trying to figure out not this part, but this part.
And
Good.
well, I just building on that, I think there is an opportunity for us as a group to lead by example in the way that we approach the ethics of what we do. Let's see, you lead an amazing group of 1,300 women who meet together to learn about development, and they're the future employees of places like Facebook and Google. And a lot of you run or participants in organizations that are making decisions about how to implement informed consent every day. And one of the things that I think as a Chicago School of Data that we might be able to do is be explicit about that, and continue the conversation and be able to say, when we come up with a new way that is both ethical and allows us to capture the opportunity in the data, to share it and to say, hey, we do this at our organization, and our constituents feel good about it, and it still allows us to learn important new things about how to serve them. And I think that's one of the great opportunities about this gathering, is that we have that opportunity to share, and we just need to figure out a way to continue to share it after this.
Right. I just want the ability to say no. You know, I want that.
Opt out, yeah.
I want to be able to opt out. I want a user experience that's so simple that someone who doesn't care can can just check a box that says, you know what, I'm not comfortable sharing this with Facebook because some brilliant data scientist has shown me this like whole branching network of who Facebook shares my data with, and that's not okay with me. You know, we have that. You know, we just need to make it accessible. So, you know, half of it is just being accessible. You know, so I want to be able to opt out, and I want to be able to make it easy for someone who doesn't know how to program or doesn't understand how a computer network works to be able to say, I want to share this, I don't want to share that. You know, it's okay if I share a little bit of this with this person, but I don't want to share that. You know, it's okay that I'm giving all of my information to the good of science, but I only want to go this deep. You know, I don't want anyone to know what city I live in or what neighborhood I live in or any of that. So trying to understand, you know, just how to say no. You know, yes means yes, no means no. It should be that clear, and it isn't.
So you've had your hand up, and then so you two next.
I want to go back to something that Matt alluded to, and Melissa, you sort of did too. You had mentioned you'd be willing to put your money towards crafting good policy around informed consent. Is there also a capitalistic solution here as well? The Google glasses, you know, is there an opportunity for some enterprising person to create something that does the cool things without selling your soul to Google? You had mentioned Locker. Is there an opportunity to do both? Good policy and capitalism.
Sure.
I know there are several companies that in different areas that make it as their main point of differentiation from their competition is that we treat your data in a way that's very different than our competition, and they and you've seen this actually now. I think going back to the Apple example, one of the things that just happened in the most recent version of both their software and their hardware is that they're now competing on privacy. They have now implemented something that says it is actually impossible for Apple to get any of the data off of the phone because it's encrypted in a way that prevents the company from knowing anything that's on there. And that's something that they did a big announcement about this, and it's something they want to compete on. So I think that's definitely the case. There's certainly going to be market pressure on that for big companies like Apple that are trying to differentiate themselves. I think where it's going to be challenging is with smaller organizations who are making those kinds of decisions every day and may not have the capacity to implement a foolproof encryption system on their data.
Right.
How do you do that?
Yeah, and it's going to be, you know, a little interesting to figure out how you're going to make money on it. I mean, right now, we have built the internet to be free, and people are used to trading privacy for, you know, freemium. And it's how are you going to make money on that? There's only so much you can make if you charge someone $3.99 for an app until you put advertising in it. When you do the advertising, you're doing the tracking. So it's trying to figure out where that trade-off is. The current model as it exists, or if you can, you know, think a little more into the future about how we're going to be using all of this connected everything and all of these data points, and how you can do that in a real and meaningful way. You know, I am a little freaked out that, you know, in 10 years' time, if I don't remember to turn off or to take out the batteries of the remote control to my television, that my movements will be tracked when I'm on the other side of the earth because of the Internet of Things. That's ridiculous, right? But that's going to happen. So it's understanding it's a whole new model, and how are you going to make money on a model that people are so used to trading on their privacy that they don't think about it anymore. until it's way too late, until they're being stalked, you know, and someone triangulates their house and they're like, hey, you know, you forgot to put who has data on one of your gazillion domains, and I know where you live, and I can watch that with my, you know, silly little drone. You know, that's scary shit. But how, you know, I would love to find out. If you think of something, you let me know. I want to know. I'll invest.
And
I was thinking that when you were saying how are people going to care, I'm starting to really care because I've just paid $160 extra for this invisible data that just started to appear on my telephone bill. So it's like I think people are really going to start to care as we're starting to get charged for this data. So now I was paying a small telephone bill, now I'm paying a higher telephone bill. And no one told me because of Facebook and the way that the way they turned on something different, that I'm being charged extra just to utilize my Facebook. And I think that's where we're going to get more people active and want to care about dealing with data. That's when we start.
Is when you have to pay for it. That's a really, that did not occur to me.
Yes. I think it's like $15 for every gig of data that I use. And I'm like, who's measuring this stuff? And how do I know, is it being measured appropriately? And it's really, and even when I'm streaming music, it's charging me more and more and more. So every day it's reminding me, oh, you running up this much of data, this much of data. So I'm like, I'm paying another phone bill here.
Right, because I'm scared to death people will know my children's names. And you're like, I don't want to pay for that.
and again with this kind of consent thing, you know, you make choose to stream data or stream music, but then you go onto Facebook and it auto plays videos now, right? Like that's like I hate it. It drives me crazy.
You gotta turn it off so you don't have to be charged for it.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Well, I'm opposed to all this. I think that, you know, it scares me much more to think of people withdrawing into little, you know, protected islands, and, you know, it undermines the tremendous value of the internet, and it undermines the whole enterprise of big data. You know, I think about Iran. You know, the Iranian mullahs just turned on, you know, Facebook or Twitter, whatever. They had it off for years. Now they decided to turn it on again. The Russian authorities under our dear friend Putin are deciding to, well, they're going to figure out a way of withdrawing Russia from the internet. I mean, this is all extremely dangerous on the other end. I really don't like this idea of, you know, people hunkering down, and, you know, you lose this huge benefit that the internet has brought us across such a broad spectrum of society and the economy. Look at the economies of scale. Look at the new products that are being created. Look at the employment. Look at the tremendous benefits. I mean, you pushed yourself away from it because when you were pregnant you didn't want to be advertised to. But suppose you missed out on a wonderful new product that you might have learned about during that pregnancy that might have made it easier or safer. You wouldn't have known about it because you pushed yourself away.
I was absolutely, that wasn't me, that was someone else. I was absolutely happy to be on the internet when I was pregnant because I am so valuable to marketers as a pregnant woman.
So,
right?
10
I
times
am
more valuable.
the most valuable consumer out there as a pregnant woman. So, you know.
All the wonderful new products. You don't want to
Right.
miss out on that.
I totally did.
But I think maybe that's a great transition into talking more about opportunity.
Right,
And
well,
how we do this right.
Well, there's this book, I don't know when this was, 2006 maybe. Also, there was a paper written in 2006 called Our Data Ourselves, which kind of predicts all of this stuff. But there was a book that came out called Microtrends, and kind of about, you know, the internet and doing this and just getting, you know, all you need is 1% of the population to create this large movement. And we're seeing that on the internet everywhere. I mean, there are some great things that happened. You know, of course, now the Middle East is in this turmoil of trying to figure out who they are again, and all of those things. But it's, you know, it's not that the sharing is terrible. It's that we need to understand how to ethically do it. And right now, every time I read TechCrunch and another advertising company has gotten a gazillion dollars, you know, a couple $1 million to do something new with my data, it makes me sick to my stomach, because I think that model is inherently flawed. and we need to find an ethical thing. So it's not the sharing, it's that I don't know who these people are that now know what my shoe size is, now know, the adjectives I use, every article that I use, every typo that I make, who my friends are, and that's uncomfortable. And it should be uncomfortable from a city standpoint as well, how we get funded, how certain things happen, whether, all of these things start mattering ethically. Yes, the internet does wonderful things. Yes, we should be paying attention to the ways that we're using that, just like any relationship. It should be more good than bad.
And this just goes to the question from the back as well. I think we're all kind of on the fence about this. We all see the opportunities and the great stuff about it. We all also see the stuff that's scary. And so that's why we're trying to have this conversation today, is to talk about what are those social contracts, and really to kind of reiterate the point that Melissa made, like, this idea that sharing is implicitly kind of a trust relationship. And so do I trust the person or the entity on the other end of that relationship, being more informed about that and thinking about that? We're not, Rousseau once said, he was like, oh, the modern world is terrible. This isn't like the 1790s. He's like, but what, would I go live with the bears? No, I have to live here. We have to figure it out. So that's why we're having this conversation today, not to kind of go live in our caves, but to figure out how to make this all work. Right. I think we have about 5 minutes left, right? Is that right? 5 minutes or so? So if there's just a few more questions, I know Matt wanted to address opportunity a little bit, and then we'll wrap up.
In the spirit of opportunity with data, from my work, we're working on developing consent forms or revising consent forms for data sharing within a network of data that's shared across homeless providers in the city of Chicago. So it's sensitive data in the nature that it's very individual, it's very identifiable. It's talking about your previous residents, it's classifying people in categories to determine their vulnerability for homelessness, for poverty, and the intention of sharing this data is to allow us to track progress and track trends in implementations and interventions. So we've imposed consent forms recently in the last 5 years or so to actually allow people to opt in, opt out. We're taking away the option to be anonymous, as it used to be an option. But my task now, as part of one of our committees, is to consider other models for requesting consent in other ways, like maybe we're not asking for consent, but maybe we ask people to opt out as opposed to that, and just having assumed consent if you don't opt out. And that is a model that's being practiced in other parts of the state. But one of the models, or one of the ways in which we want to decide this, is to go to our constituents and ask them what they want and how they want us to protect their privacy. But my question is, what should I ask when I go to our constituents? I'm talking about homeless people and people that are on a level that I'm struggling even with how we explain the database to them or what we're doing with the data. And the fact is, it goes to Congress. The end result is that it's going to Congress in order to determine where funding is needed in the entire nation for these services.
Can I ask why exactly you decided not to anonymize? Why they no longer can be anonymous?
It's because we end up having so much duplication of who it is that we're serving that you can't look at what
You
the
have to be able to
successes
track them over time.
and it just has completely made the data unvaluable to us in so many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
having unique identifying information is incredibly important so that it's not anonymous. So we have identifiers that we can use to identify the data. But
Sure.
So before I kind of approach your question, I'd love to just throw out a proposal just to see if you're interested, and then maybe hopefully other folks. It would be fantastic if your consent form and your description about when you give consent was on the Chicago School of Data website somewhere, like as a resource for the people, and that other organizations here that have similar consent forms could upload theirs as well and say this is the time in which we do it, and that would be fantastic. right? If you
And-
Google consent forms, there's
then
the
how-
NIH. What?
How do you anonymize those to protect companies? And then, so there's a whole ethical conversation around just putting those up.
Oh, so it's opt-in,
And
right?
then-
So this is and you're not getting any information about who
would-
filled out the consent form. You're just getting information.
It's good thinking, because then you have to worry about context, because context mattered to your program. If you didn't have the right context and all of this thing was duplicated or whatever, then anonymizing didn't matter. So it's even context on the site.
Yeah.
How do you anonymize it? How do
Yeah.
you do it this way? How do you, how are you able to share the wonders of the internet within the right context to make the data valuable without putting people at risk?
And that is certainly the struggle. Is that something that your organization? I don't know if you can speak for them, but that would be fantastic.
We're part of the entire continuum for the city of Chicago, so that is the consent form that goes
For all of homeless
persons
persons.
Everyone.
in this database, which we are required to do by funders. So it's really a conversation I would take back.
Take back.
Yeah.
Right.
And Taryn, is
And then-
it possible for you guys to share your consent form or?
Yeah, we're using one right now to get to access student level data from CPS. And so I'm happy to share that. There's been some issues with the effectiveness of it. But yeah, I mean, I'm really looking for ways to, do this better, so.
Right. Is it also because of an accessibility thing? Because here I'm hearing that, how do we even explain this database to homeless people?
Right.
And is it the same with yours? It's that it's
No, there wasn't really an issue so much with explaining to the parents who are allowing us to access their children's data. It was the data we were asking for isn't ultimately the data we needed
okay.
to inform our work. So
We do
So-
one at my job. We do for HIV testing. We do the opt-out policy. And we created the opt-out policy. We say as you sign up, we test here. So you can say yes or no. But we say that's just a part of our trying to give you the best care as possible. So you can try it like that. And that's worked with our population, and it's underserved.
Would you guys be willing to share that as well?
Yeah.
Right. You two should talk
should-
anyway. Yeah.
We'll follow through.
Is it quick, Dan? We're at time.
Make sure they're also being licensed in a way that people can.
Yeah.
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 That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Because we didn't even get, we
gotta
didn't
be
even
in
get
there
to
now,
that,
too.
the
License.
open sourceness of it.
Yeah.
1:45.
Yeah.
There
Go
it
to
is.
dance session at
Go to dance
1:45.
session. Yeah.
All right.
There we
Thank
go.
you, everybody. We're at time. This was really great.
Right.
Thank you
I'm
so
gonna-
much for all your questions.
I'm gonna put these back on and look imposing.
So I can't wink.
You can't wink.
I can't wink.
I think you could blink
You
though.
can blink.
You
and
can
it'll
blink
work.
too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, because the camera's not paying attention to the other side.
Yeah.
So-
So you don't actually have to be able to wink.
Right. But I think that's a feature. You can also just hit this button on top, right, and it'll take a picture.
Right.
Right. Or you can just hold it and it will take a video.
Man, there's two things I really wanted to bring up. One is Google's collecting all this stuff anyway. Why do you feel weird about it being the glass?
welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, good to
Right.
see you.
Because you know what? What we should have said is the glass makes me physically uncomfortable to wear it.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm
Yeah.
I'm the delivery. I'm the
But you are.
messenger.
I mean, what's interesting is that, like, the point is that you already are. Like, your data
Right.
is like your body.
Exactly.
It's such a good point.
But then
Yeah, there's
yeah.
the kind of terror.
I have to apologize. I always take extreme positions.
Oh no, it was great.
No, that was good.
It was great.
I'm not totally on that side of the
Right. It was
equation.
fantastic. Thank you.
Good to meet you.
There's an issue of inclusion. And one of the